Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Meridian and watched the alien ships approach. 3 massive vessels moved through space like silver daggers cutting through black silk. Each ship was 10 times larger than his own vessel, and they glowed with a strange blue light that hurt his eyes to look at directly. Amy Rodriguez sat at her station nearby and checked her translation equipment for the 100th time. She was the best xenolinguist in the fleet, but her hands still shook as she prepared for first contact with an unknown alien species. The signals they had been receiving for the past week were unlike anything in human databases. The lead alien ship sent out a beam of light that wrapped around the Meridian like a gentle hand. Jake felt his ship being pulled forward, but not roughly. These aliens had power, but they were not using it to hurt his crew. At least not yet. Tony Martinez looked up from his communications console and nodded at Amy. The signal was coming through clearly now. Strange musical sounds filled the bridge, and Amy began working to decode them. The sounds were beautiful, but alien in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. The alien voice that finally came through the speakers was cold and distant. It spoke in perfect English, which surprised everyone on the bridge. Amy had expected to spend hours working through basic communication protocols. "Primitive vessel," the voice said. "You will follow us to the designated area. Do not attempt to resist or you will be destroyed without further warning." Jake stepped forward and activated his own communication system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration vessel Meridian. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations." There was a long pause before the alien voice responded. When it did speak again, there was something like amusement in its tone. "Diplomatic relations. How amusing. You will follow us, little creatures. Your kind is not ready for true communication." The alien ships began moving toward a nearby moon, and the Meridian was pulled along with them. Jake had no choice but to comply. His ship was fast, but these aliens could destroy him before he could even think about running. Dr. Nathan Cross joined them on the bridge as they approached the moon. He was their chief anthropologist, and his job was to understand alien cultures. But looking at the massive alien ships around them, he wondered if human understanding would even matter to these beings. The moon they approached was barren and rocky with no atmosphere. But as they got closer, Jake could see structures on the surface that had not been there in their initial scans. The aliens had built something while they waited. Amy continued listening to the alien communications, and her face grew more troubled with each passing minute. The aliens were not just talking to each other. They were talking about humans, and what they were saying was not encouraging. "They keep using a word that translates roughly to savage or primitive," she told Jake quietly. "But they use it the way we might talk about pets or zoo animals." The Meridian was guided to a landing pad that appeared to be made from the same blue glowing material as the alien ships. Jake had never seen anything like it. The material seemed solid but also seemed to flow like liquid at the same time. As soon as they landed, a group of aliens approached their ship. Jake got his first good look at their new hosts through the viewport and felt his breath catch in his throat. The aliens were tall and thin with skin that looked like polished crystal. They moved with perfect grace, and their eyes glowed with the same blue light as their ships. The leader of the group wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. When he spoke, his voice carried across the airless moon, directly into their communication system without any technology that Jake could see. "I am High Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien said. "You primitive beings have wandered into our territory. Normally we would simply destroy such inferior creatures, but you amuse us. We will allow you to establish a small research station on this moon where you can be studied." Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but he forced it down. Getting angry would not help his crew survive this encounter. "We appreciate your hospitality, Commander Veltar. May I ask what you mean by primitive beings?" The alien leader made a sound that might have been laughter. "Look around you, human. Our ships cross the galaxy in moments while you crawl between stars like insects. Our technology is beyond your comprehension. We speak the sacred tongue that was given to us by the architects themselves. You cannot even begin to understand such divine knowledge." Amy leaned forward at her station. The mention of a sacred language interested her greatly. "Commander Veltar, would it be possible for us to learn about your sacred tongue? We are very interested in understanding other cultures and languages." This time the alien definitely laughed. "Foolish creature. The sacred tongue is not for savages to learn. It is the language of the gods themselves. Only the most evolved and enlightened beings can hope to comprehend its divine mathematics and quantum poetry. Your primitive minds would break if you tried to understand even the simplest phrases. Several other Zephyrians had gathered around their leader, and Jake could hear them making sounds among themselves. Amy worked frantically at her console trying to translate. But the sounds were unlike anything she had ever encountered. "They are laughing at us," she whispered to Jake. "They think the idea of humans learning their language is the funniest thing they have ever heard." High Commander Veltar gestured toward a section of the moon's surface. "You will build your research station there. Do not attempt to travel beyond the boundaries we set for you. Do not attempt to interfere with Zephyrian activities. Think of yourselves as specimens in a zoo and behave accordingly." The alien leader turned away dismissively and began walking back toward his ship. But then he paused and looked back at the humans. "Oh, and do not attempt to record or study the sacred tongue. Such knowledge is far beyond your capabilities and would only frustrate your limited minds." Jake watched the aliens leave and felt a mixture of humiliation and determination burning in his chest. The Zephyrians had made it clear that they viewed humans as nothing more than amusing animals. But Jake had not come this far across the galaxy to be treated like a pet in an alien zoo. Amy was already making notes about everything she had observed. The challenge of learning the Zephyrian sacred tongue would be the greatest test of her career. But something in the way the aliens had dismissed human capabilities so completely made her more determined than ever to prove them wrong. The human crew of the Meridian began unloading their equipment to build their research station. They were stranded on an alien moon and treated like savages by beings who claimed to speak the language of gods. But they were humans, and humans had never accepted limitations placed on them by others. The real work was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the humans built their research station on the barren moon. Amy Rodriguez barely slept anymore. She spent every waking moment listening to Zephyrian communications and trying to understand their sacred tongue. Her small laboratory was filled with recording equipment and analysis screens that showed wave patterns and frequency charts. The Zephyrians came to watch her work sometimes. They would stand outside her laboratory windows and point at her like visitors at a zoo, watching a monkey try to use tools. Their laughter echoed across the moon's surface, even through the thin walls of the human base. Tony Martinez helped Amy by recording every conversation the Zephyrians had within range of their sensors. He was a communications specialist and understood signal processing better than anyone else on the team. But even he was frustrated by the alien language. "It's not just words, Amy," Tony said as he played back another recording. "Listen to this part where they're discussing their ship repairs. The sounds they make change the actual frequency of their communication devices. It's like their language physically affects their technology." Amy nodded and made notes on her tablet. She had noticed the same thing, but hearing Tony confirm it made her more certain. The sacred tongue was not just a language. It was something much more complex and powerful than she had first thought. Lisa Kim joined them in the laboratory that evening. She was their quantum mathematician and had been analyzing the patterns in Zephyrian speech. Her findings were even more surprising than Tony's observations. The mathematical relationships in their language follow quantum field equations, Lisa said as she showed them her calculations. Every syllable they speak creates specific resonance patterns that match theoretical models for space-time manipulation. Amy felt excitement building in her chest for the first time in weeks. "You mean their language actually affects reality itself?" "That's exactly what I mean," Lisa replied. "But here's the strange part. The Zephyrians don't seem to understand what they're doing. They speak these words because they were taught to speak them. They follow patterns without understanding the science behind those patterns." The 3 humans worked late into the night sharing their discoveries. Amy began to see connections she had missed before. The sacred tongue was not just communication. It was a form of technology that the Zephyrians used without truly comprehending. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. High Commander Veltar arrived with several other Zephyrian officials to inspect the human research station. They walked through the corridors like lords touring their estate and examining their property. Dr. Nathan Cross tried to engage them in conversation about Zephyrian culture and history. The aliens answered his questions with the patience of adults explaining simple concepts to small children. "Your species is very young," one of the officials told Nathan. "You have not yet learned to accept your limitations. The Zephyrian Empire has guided this sector of the galaxy for 10,000 of your years. We understand the proper order of things." Amy tried to stay focused on her work, but she could hear the conversation from her laboratory. The casual dismissal in the alien's voice made her angry, but she channeled that anger into determination. Captain Jake Morrison joined the tour when the aliens reached the main laboratory. He watched them examine Amy's equipment with expressions of mild curiosity. What is this primitive creature attempting to accomplish? High Commander Veltar asked Jake while pointing at Amy's workstation. Lieutenant Rodriguez is our xenolinguist, Jake replied carefully. She is studying your language to better understand your culture. The Zephyrian leader made that sound that might have been laughter. How adorable. The savage believes it can comprehend the sacred tongue. Does it also believe it can understand the mathematics of stellar formation, or the quantum mechanics of consciousness transfer? Amy looked up from her work and met the alien commander's glowing eyes. Actually, sir, I've made some interesting discoveries about the mathematical relationships in your language. Would you like to hear them? The room fell silent. Even the other Zephyrians stopped their conversations to stare at Amy. High Commander. Veltar's crystalline features showed what might have been surprise. You believe you have discovered something about the sacred tongue that we do not already know? He asked slowly. Amy stood up and activated her main display screen. Charts and equations filled the wall, showing the patterns she had found in Zephyrian speech. Your language creates quantum field resonances that directly manipulate space-time. Each word you speak generates specific frequency patterns that interface with the fundamental forces of reality. The Zephyrians stared at the display in silence. Amy could see confusion in their glowing eyes as they looked at mathematical proofs they did not recognize. This is impossible, one of the officials whispered. The sacred tongue cannot be reduced to primitive mathematics. But it can, Lisa Kim said as she joined the conversation. The equations are actually quite elegant once you understand the underlying quantum field theory. High Commander Veltar stepped closer to the display screen. His perfect composure was beginning to crack. The sacred tongue is divine knowledge given to us by the architects themselves. It cannot be understood through mere science. Amy pulled up another screen showing recorded Zephyrian conversations with frequency analysis overlays. Every time you speak about ship navigation, your words generate specific quantum resonances. When you discuss matter transmission, the frequency patterns shift to match dimensional folding mathematics. You're not just talking about these technologies. Your language is actually operating them. Tony Martinez activated his communication equipment and played back a recording of Zephyrian engineers working on their ships. Listen to this conversation about engine repairs. Now watch what happens when I filter out everything, except the quantum resonance frequencies. The filtered audio created a perfect mathematical sequence that matched theoretical models for faster-than-light propulsion. The Zephyrians listened with growing alarm as their sacred words were reduced to scientific equations. This cannot be correct, High Commander Veltar said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The sacred tongue is beyond such simple analysis. Amy saved her data and turned to face the alien commander. With respect, sir, I think your people have been using technology you don't fully understand. The sacred tongue isn't divine magic. It's an incredibly sophisticated programming language that interfaces directly with quantum fields. The Zephyrian officials exchanged glances with each other. For the first time since contact began, they looked uncertain. The humans had shown them something about their own culture that they had never realized. High Commander Veltar drew himself up to his full imposing height. Enough of this nonsense. The sacred tongue is not for primitive minds to analyze. You will cease this research immediately. But Amy could see doubt in his glowing eyes. The certainty that had defined Zephyrian superiority was beginning to crack. And she was just getting started. 2 weeks after High Commander Veltar had ordered them to stop their research, Amy Rodriguez was still working in secret. She had moved her equipment to a storage room in the deepest part of the human base, where Zephyrian sensors could not detect her activities. Tony Martinez and Lisa Kim helped her continue analyzing the sacred tongue, despite the alien commander's warnings. Dr. Nathan Cross made an important discovery while exploring the far side of the moon. He had been studying the geology of their new home when his ground sensors detected something unusual beneath the surface. The readings showed massive artificial structures buried deep in the moon's core. Jake, you need to see this, Nathan said over the communication system. There's something down here that's definitely not natural. The metal compositions match nothing in our databases, but the construction patterns suggest a civilization far older than the Zephyrians. Captain. Jake Morrison joined Nathan at the excavation site along with Amy and her research team. They had brought portable drilling equipment and were carefully removing layers of rock and dust that had accumulated over millions of years. What they found beneath the surface took their breath away. Massive crystalline structures stretched deep into the moon's interior. The crystals were similar to Zephyrian technology but far more advanced. Strange symbols covered every surface, and they glowed with a soft golden light that was completely different from the blue glow of Zephyrian devices. These symbols, Amy whispered as she examined the crystal walls with her portable scanner. They're similar to the mathematical relationships I found in the sacred tongue, but much more complex. This is like comparing a child's drawing to a master's painting. Lisa Kim was already taking measurements and running calculations on her tablet. The quantum field readings from the crystals were unlike anything they had encountered. These structures are generating power somehow. They're drawing energy directly from the quantum vacuum itself. The team spent 3 days carefully exploring the underground complex. They found vast halls filled with crystalline machinery that still functioned after countless ages. Libraries of information were stored in quantum. Matrices that responded to human presence by displaying holographic records. Tony Martinez managed to interface his communication equipment with one of the ancient terminals. The information that flowed into their systems was staggering in its scope and complexity. Amy, this is incredible. These records contain the complete history of whoever built this place. They called themselves the architects. Amy worked frantically to translate the architect records using the patterns she had learned from studying the sacred tongue. What she discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy's history. The architects weren't gods, she said as the holographic displays showed images of a civilization that had once spanned thousands of star systems. They were scientists and engineers just like us. They built all of this technology and then they left detailed instructions for future civilizations to use it. The records showed that the architects had been exploring the galaxy millions of years before the Zephyrians had even evolved. They had left behind a network of technological artifacts on thousands of worlds. The sacred tongue was their programming language, designed to allow other species to operate architect technology safely. But something had gone wrong with their plan. Dr. Nathan Cross found records showing that most civilizations had treated architect technology as religious artifacts, rather than scientific tools. They had learned to recite the programming commands without understanding what they meant. The Zephyrians are just the latest in a long line of civilizations that found architect technology and started worshipping it instead of studying it, Nathan explained as he shared his findings with the team. They'd been using this technology for thousands of years, but they never bothered to learn how it actually works. Lisa Kim discovered something even more important in the deepest parts of the architect database. The records contained complete technical manuals for every piece of technology the Zephyrians considered sacred. Faster than light travel, matter transmission, dimensional manipulation, and even consciousness transfer protocols were all explained in detail. This is everything, Amy, Lisa said with excitement in her voice. Every question we've had about how their technology works is answered right here. The architects left us a complete scientific education, but their celebration was cut short by alarms from the surface. Tony Martinez monitored their communication links and his face went pale as he listened to the incoming signals. We have a problem, he said. High Commander Veltar is coming back and he's bringing the entire Zephyrian battle fleet with him. Our excavation has triggered some kind of alert in their systems. Amy looked at the vast library of architect knowledge surrounding them. They had found the key to understanding the most advanced technology in the galaxy, but they might not live long enough to use it. Jake Morrison activated his emergency communication system and contacted the Meridian. All crew returned to the ship immediately. Prepare for possible evacuation. But even as they prepared to flee, Amy could not tear herself away from the architect terminals. The knowledge she was seeing represented thousands of years of scientific advancement. The mathematical principles behind reality manipulation were laid out in perfect detail. Amy, we have to go, Tony urged as the ground above them began to shake from the approach of Zephyrian ships. Wait, Amy said as she downloaded as much information as possible into her portable storage devices. I need to get the quantum field equations for space-time manipulation. If we understand how this works, we might have a chance. The team raced back to the surface as Zephyrian battlecruisers filled the sky above their moon. High Commander Veltar's voice echoed across the landscape from massive speakers on his flagship. Primitive creatures, the alien commander announced. You have defiled the most sacred site in Zephyrian space. The Temple of the First Words is forbidden to savage minds. For this blasphemy you will all be executed, and your pathetic research destroyed. Amy clutched her storage devices as they reached the human base. Inside those small containers was proof that the Zephyrians were not the advanced civilization they pretended to be. They were just another species that had found someone else's homework and learned to copy the answers without understanding the questions. The Zephyrian fleet surrounded their small moon and powered up weapons that could destroy entire planets. But Amy Rodriguez was no longer afraid. She had spent months learning the sacred tongue, and now she understood what it really meant. The Zephyrians thought they were about to execute primitives who had dared to touch divine knowledge. They had no idea they were about to face humans who had learned to speak the language of the real gods. The Zephyrian battle fleet filled the sky above the small moon like storm clouds gathering before a hurricane. 30 massive warships hung in perfect formation, while their weapons charged with deadly blue energy. High Commander Veltar's flagship was the largest vessel Amy Rodriguez had ever seen, and it cast a shadow over the entire human research base. Amy stood in the main laboratory surrounded by her team as they watched their certain destruction approach. But she was not thinking about death. Her mind was focused on the architect knowledge she had downloaded from the ancient temple. The quantum field equations were still running through her head like a song she could not stop humming. Amy, we need to evacuate now, Captain Jake Morrison said as he entered the laboratory. The Meridian can't fight 30 battle cruisers, but maybe we can outrun them. Amy looked at her captain and shook her head slowly. Jake, we're not running anywhere. Those ships can cross the galaxy in minutes. There's nowhere in human space they couldn't follow us. Tony Martinez was monitoring Zephyrian communications from his console. They're not just planning to kill us. Veltar is ordering his ships to destroy every trace of our research. They want to make sure no other humans ever learn what we discovered. Lisa Kim looked up from her calculations with excitement in her eyes. Amy, I've been running the math on those quantum field equations you found. The architect technology isn't just built into their ships and buildings. It's connected to planetary systems throughout this entire sector. Amy felt understanding dawn in her mind like sunrise after a long night. The architects had not just left behind individual pieces of technology. They had created an integrated network that spanned hundreds of worlds. The sacred tongue was the access language for the entire system. Show me the planetary grid, Amy said as she moved to Lisa's workstation. The display screen filled with a three-dimensional map of the local star systems. Golden lines connected thousands of worlds in a vast web of interconnected technology. Their small moon was just one node in a network that the architects had built millions of years ago. The Zephyrians never understood this, Amy whispered as she studied the pattern. They found pieces of architect technology and thought each piece was separate. They never realized it was all part of one massive system. Dr. Nathan Cross joined them at the console. According to the temple records, this network was designed to respond to anyone who truly understood the sacred tongue. The architects wanted their knowledge to be inherited by species that could think scientifically rather than just follow religious rituals. Amy looked around at her team and made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. Tony, I need you to boost our communication array to maximum power. Lisa, I need those quantum field equations loaded into our computer core. Nathan, I need you to help me interface with the architect network. Jake Morrison stepped forward with concern in his voice. Amy, what are you planning to do? I'm going to speak the sacred tongue the way it was meant to be spoken, Amy replied as she began activating systems throughout the laboratory. Not as memorized prayers, but as scientific commands that actually mean something. The ground beneath their feet began to shake as Zephyrian landing ships approached the surface. High Commander Veltar was not content to simply destroy the humans from orbit. He wanted to see their faces when they realized how completely they had been defeated. Amy connected her communication equipment to the quantum resonance generators they had found in the architect temple. The ancient machines came to life for the first time in millions of years as she began to speak words in the sacred tongue that no Zephyrian had ever truly understood. The first words she spoke were simple commands to identify active architect systems within range. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every piece of technology on the moon began glowing with golden light instead of the blue glow the Zephyrians were used to seeing. Amy, something's happening. Tony said as his sensors detected massive power buildups throughout the lunar surface. The entire moon is coming online. Amy continued speaking in the sacred tongue, but her words were not the ritualistic phrases the Zephyrians recited. She was giving specific technical instructions to quantum field generators that had been waiting eons for someone who understood their purpose. Massive structures began rising from beneath the moon's surface. Weapon systems that made Zephyrian battlecruisers look like toys emerged from hidden chambers and turned their targeting arrays toward the fleet above. Defensive shields activated around the human base with power levels that registered off every scale. High Commander. Veltar's voice crackled over their communication system with panic, replacing his earlier arrogance. What is happening? How are primitives activating the sacred systems? Amy spoke her reply in the sacred tongue, and her words were broadcast directly into every Zephyrian ship through their own communication networks. But her words did more than just communicate. They took control of Zephyrian technology and turned it against them. I am speaking the language your people never learned, Amy said, as Zephyrian ships began losing power and falling back from the moon. You memorized the prayers, but you never understood the science. The architects left their knowledge for species that could think, not species that could only repeat. The largest architect defense platform finished rising from the lunar surface and aimed its primary weapon at Veltar's flagship. The weapon charged with golden energy that made the air itself sing with harmonics that human ears could barely detect. Lisa Kim was recording everything, and her voice was filled with wonder. Amy, the power readings are incredible. This single weapon system has more destructive capability than our entire fleet. But Amy was not interested in destruction. She spoke new commands in the sacred tongue, and the weapon's targeting shifted away from the Zephyrian ships. Instead of firing destructively, the beam reached out and gently disabled the alien fleet's weapons and engines. I could destroy you all right now, Amy announced to the helpless Zephyrian fleet. But the architects were scientists, not conquerors. They built this network to share knowledge, not to wage war. High Commander Veltar's ship was pulled down to the moon's surface by invisible forces he could not understand or control. When the alien commander stepped out of his landing craft, his crystalline features showed an emotion Amy had never seen before in a Zephyrian. Fear. Amy walked across the lunar surface to meet him without any protective suit. The architect systems had created an atmosphere bubble around the entire area, and she breathed easily in air that should not have existed. How is this possible? Veltar whispered as he stared at the massive architect installation surrounding them. The sacred tongue cannot be spoken by primitive minds. Amy smiled as she looked up at the disabled Zephyrian fleet hanging motionless in the sky above them. Commander Veltar, there's something you need to understand about humans. We don't just memorize the words of gods. We figure out what those words actually mean. High Commander Veltar stood on the surface of the moon and stared at the massive architect installations that surrounded him. His perfect crystalline features showed confusion and fear as he tried to understand how primitive humans had accomplished something that his people considered impossible. The sacred systems had never responded to Zephyrian commands the way they obeyed Amy Rodriguez. Amy walked among the golden towers that had risen from beneath the lunar surface. Each structure hummed with power that made the Zephyrian battle fleet look like toys floating helplessly in the sky above. She spoke occasional words in the sacred tongue, and the ancient machines responded instantly to her commands. This cannot be real, Veltar whispered as he watched Amy activate systems his people had spent thousands of years trying to understand. The sacred tongue is divine knowledge given only to the chosen races. Amy turned to face the alien commander, and her expression was patient but firm. Commander Veltar, your people never received divine knowledge. You found the homework that someone else left behind, and you learned to copy the answers without understanding the questions. Tony Martinez emerged from the human research base, carrying a portable communication array. He had been monitoring transmissions throughout the sector, and his news was remarkable. Amy, the word is spreading fast. Every species in Zephyrian space is hearing about what happened here. The entire power structure of the galaxy is starting to shift. Dr. Nathan Cross joined them, carrying data tablets filled with architect historical records. I've been analyzing the temple database, and the story is even more incredible than we thought. The architects visited hundreds of worlds and left technology for any species smart enough to figure out how it worked. Most civilizations just worshipped the machines instead of studying them. Lisa Kim activated her quantum field scanner and pointed it toward the distant stars. The readings showed architect installations on planets throughout the sector, all coming online in response to Amy's commands. The entire network is waking up. Technology that's been dormant for millions of years is responding to someone who finally speaks their language correctly. High Commander, Veltar fell to his knees as he watched his worldview crumble around him. We are the chosen ones. We have guided this sector for 10,000 years. We are the inheritors of divine wisdom. Amy knelt down beside the broken alien leader and her voice was gentle. You were never chosen, Commander. You just found some tools and decided they made you special. The real test was whether you would try to understand those tools or just use them blindly. Captain Jake Morrison approached the group with a communication device in his hand. Amy, I'm getting messages from human colonies throughout known space. Every government wants to know what we've discovered here. The news is spreading faster than our fastest ships. Amy stood up and looked around at the transformed lunar landscape. Architect installations stretched to the horizon in every direction, and each one represented technology that could revolutionize human civilization. But more importantly, they represented knowledge that belonged to any species willing to earn it through understanding. Jake sent a message to Earth and all the colonies, Amy said as she made her decision about humanity's future. Tell them we're establishing the Human Institute for Architect Studies. Any species that wants to learn the real sacred tongue is welcome to come and study with us. Veltar looked up at Amy with something like hope flickering in his glowing eyes. You would teach us, even after we called you savages and treated you like animals? Amy helped the alien commander to his feet and smiled. Commander, the architects didn't build this network to create masters and slaves. They built it to share knowledge with anyone smart enough to appreciate it. Your people spent thousands of years memorizing prayers. Now you can spend some time learning science. Over the following weeks, the small lunar research station became the most important location in the galaxy. Ships arrived daily, carrying representatives from dozens of species who had heard about humans unlocking architect technology. The same aliens who had mocked humanity as primitive now came as students, seeking to understand what they had missed. Amy established her institute in the ancient architect temple and began teaching the first classes in true sacred tongue comprehension. Her students included Zephyrians who had spent centuries reciting meaningless phrases and other aliens who had found architect artifacts on their worlds without understanding their purpose. Tony Martinez set up communication networks that connected the growing institute with architect installations throughout the galaxy. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient network was being used as its builders had intended. Knowledge flowed freely between worlds as species learned to speak the language of science rather than the language of worship. Lisa Kim led research teams that explored the mathematical principles behind architect technology. Her work resulted in breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light travel, matter manipulation, and dimensional engineering. But more importantly, her research showed that the architects had been teachers rather than gods. Dr. Nathan cross-documented the cultural revolution that spread throughout the galaxy as species abandoned religious approaches to technology in favor of scientific understanding. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia began to dissolve as knowledge became more important than ancient claims of divine favor. Captain Jake Morrison found himself appointed as humanity's first galactic ambassador. The species that had once dismissed humans as savages now sought human guidance in understanding technologies they had used without comprehension for centuries. High Commander Veltar became one of Amy's most dedicated students. The former leader of the Zephyrian Empire spent his days learning quantum field theory, and his nights studying the mathematical principles he had once dismissed as primitive nonsense. His transformation from arrogant overlord to humble student symbolized the change sweeping through known space. Amy Rodriguez stood in her laboratory 6 months after first contact and looked out at a galaxy that had been transformed by understanding. The architect network connected thousands of worlds where species that had once been enemies now collaborated on scientific research. The language barriers that had divided the galaxy for eons were falling as everyone learned to speak the true sacred tongue of knowledge and discovery. The irony was not lost on her. The species everyone had called savages had become the teachers while the self-proclaimed masters of the galaxy had become students. But that was exactly what the architects had intended. They had left their knowledge not for those who claimed to be chosen, but for those who chose to understand. Amy activated her communication system and prepared to broadcast the day's lessons to students throughout the galaxy. She began to speak in the sacred tongue, but her words were not prayers or ritual phrases. They were equations and theories and explanations that helped others unlock the secrets of the universe. The galaxy would never be the same because humanity had proven that the difference between civilization and savagery was not about who could best copy the words of gods, but about who cared enough to discover what those words actually meant.